So the next speaker that we have for today is Colin Jackson, who heads Arocha, Kenya. He's based at the coast at Watamu in Kenya. And he's going to be talking about the Indian house crow, which is an invasive species here in Kenya, an invasive bird species. And there's some efforts being put in to try and control it because it's quite detrimental to our local biodiversity. So he's going to be talking about how the Atlas is being used to help in those efforts. So over to you, Colin.
Thanks, Sydney. Let me try and share my screen then. See if this works. Can you see that? Has that worked?
Yes, it has. We can see.
Great. Yeah, awesome. Good. Well, thanks, Sydney, and thanks, Les, as well, for the invitation to this. It's been great to see all these citizen science hours happening and being able to share results and what's happening in citizen science across Africa, which is very exciting. And it's always good listening to Laban. So thank you, Laban, for your talk there. I certainly learned a bit about dragonflies. So moving from dragonflies to crows, and to one in particular, which is a pest. And I know anyone in South Africa, particularly along the coast, Durban and down to Cape Town, will be familiar with the house crow, which occurs there as well. But it's particularly a problem here on the coast in Kenya and the rest of East African coastline, actually. So just a quick background about the house crow. Corvus splendens, apparently a very splendid bird. It's, I suppose it's got a bit of a glossy sheen to it. It's native to the Indian subcontinent, but was introduced to East Africa, or Africa really, through Zanzibar in 1891. The British consulate there, I think he'd lived in India and seen them eating rubbish and thought that they would do a good job to clean the rubbish up in Zanzibar. So he brought in a few, and within about 15 years, there was a bounty awarded for any dead crows or crows' eggs which could be brought in, because they had already become such a pest by that time. They spread to the mainland and then north and south along the East African coast, reaching Mombasa in 1947, and all the way south to Cape Town and north to Cairo and throughout the Middle East. In the 1980s, they were considered common in Malindi, which is the town just to the north of where I live, in Watamu. Watamu and Malindi lie about 100 kilometers north of Mombasa along the coast. So they've become recognized as quite a pest really since the 80s. And in the 90s, there was some attempt to control them a little bit in certain pockets. And the reason for that is that as pests, they particularly predate on indigenous birds and animals. They eat the eggs and chicks of birds, destroy nests. They'll chase adults. They've become quite a familiar sight on the reefs, the exposed reef at low tide, and must be having quite a negative impact on reef fauna. I don't know there's been any work actually done by marine biologists to study the impact of house crows, and that's certainly an opportunity waiting to be studied. But just this week, the Kenya Wildlife Warden for Watamu Marine Park has written to his boss requesting permission to try and trap the crows, because they are being seen more and more in the reef ecosystem. So they are a real challenge in that way. They harass birds as well. They don't just kill and eat small things. You can see there on the right, there's an owl being attacked by a crow. There's a bat in the middle. And I've seen them chasing birds, which there's no way they'd be getting food off them. Waders chasing them 200-300 meters persistently across open water for no reason than just being a bad bully, really. So that's one of the issues. They have quite an impact on human society. excuse me, they cause direct and severe losses to agriculture. They will eat the small seedlings that grow from crops. They will attack chicks, particularly baby chickens. There's been a chicken farmer who's had to shut down their business because crows have hammered their chicken farm. They work as a team. One will distract the mother hen, and another will come in from behind and grab a chick. They've also been known to peck the eyes out of newborn calves, and as I say, damage crops and things. In tourism, they're a big problem. Many of the hotels actually have to employ people with catapults just to keep the crows away from what is in the hot climate here on the coast. Invariably, restaurants are open for the breeze and the coolness and just for a beautiful setting, and the crows love that. They come in and sit on the tables and eat steal from tourists, get plates and from the buffets. Pollution and hygiene, another problem. They pick up rubbish, which is one of their main food sources, and there's a high correlation that's been shown. I think even in South Africa, there's been studies that have shown that in suburbs where rubbish is thrown out any old how, there's a high number of crows, and where it's treated properly and kept in dustbins and collected well, then there's a much lower prevalence of house crows. Here we have very bad rubbish collection systems, and so there's plenty of food for them, and of course they collect that and they fly off with it and drop it at different places throughout suburban areas, and in such a way they spread disease and pollution. They're very noisy, particularly when they come to roost, and that can be quite a problem to people as well. And they've been known to be carriers of at least 8 human diseases. So they really are a significant pest, and they breed like crazy, and they really thrive in the coastal ecosystem and climate. There's been a few attempts to control them over the years, and particularly using starlicide, which is a poison developed in America to poison the European starling. There's also been trapping that's been tried for many years, and in fact is continuing present. But traps, you can catch quite a few traps. They've killed in Watamu about 2,000 crows in over about 3 years, but they get replaced very quickly because it's quite a slow process, and it's quite expensive and time intensive. Poisoning is by far the best, and starlicide is a very specific herbicide that will only take effect on the bird about 10 hours after the bird has consumed it, by which time it has metabolized the whole poison. So the advantage of that is that when the bird dies, the corpse can be eaten by something else. In fact, there was an old man who lived on the streets in Mombasa sometime when we were doing poisoning earlier in the 2000s. He'd collect crows and eat them with no problem at all. But that is a big advantage, so you don't get secondary poisoning from them. And they're very voracious animals, so they keep away anything else that comes near the bait. And so it's a very effective way of getting rid of them, actually, using starlicide. So we got the numbers. We were doing a poisoning program from 1997 to 2005, and we had the numbers of birds in Malindi down to about 30, and in Watamu to about 5 birds. Through just regular low-level poisoning. But in 2005, the government stopped that because the guy who'd been importing the poison hadn't followed the correct bureaucratic routes, and they threw the book at the whole program and stopped it. And we haven't been able to start it yet, though we're looking to get close to that soon. There's been quite a push to improve it. And as a result, the numbers have increased to over 20,000 in Malindi, 6,000 or so in Watamu, and along the whole coast there's at least 500,000. Some would say more. We were to do surveys earlier this year, but with the coronavirus we were unable to do the counts, but hopefully we'll be getting funding that we can do some proper estimates at roosts. It's obviously very important for biodiversity and for the economy to try and control them. And so there's a real effort to try and do this. So if you're trying to eradicate a pest, well, how do you go about it? Obviously, you need a method by which to kill them. And I've talked of the poison, and that's definitely, from our experience and what others have found elsewhere, is the most effective way of doing it. But alongside that, there is an extremely important, critical question to ask, which is where do they occur? Where are they? If you don't know where they are, then you can't target them. And where do they concentrate? Where are the main concentrations? Because you don't want to put all your effort into an area which is on the periphery rather than the core of the range. Because often what happens with bird populations is as you hammer the core, and as adults will be killed in a core area, then those on the periphery will move in to take up those prime habitats and prime territories. And so you don't have to go out to the peripheries to get rid of them there. They will automatically, pretty much by default, move into the core of the range. So it's important to try and work that out. And then, of course, as you begin to control the birds, you need to monitor the progress. How effective is your control program? Is the range shrinking? Are the numbers actually reducing? And thankfully, the protocol of the Kenya Bird Map, or which is the African Bird Atlas protocol, started with the South African Bird Atlas Project 2 in South Africa, Southern Africa. The protocol is very sweet for providing these answers. It's a nice tight protocol of 2 hours minimum birding, recording all species in the order you see them over a 5-day period. And that produces some data which are delightfully analyzable in a way which produces results which can really be used by managers, and in this case by looking at how best to target crows for control. So to answer the question where, this is a snapshot on the right of the current status of coverage for the Kenya Bird Map project. You can see the red squares are the ones with the highest number of cards, which is a single 5-day period list from a 5-day period covering all species, so full protocol cards. And the gray ones show just 1 or 2, or 1 record, 1 card, or some ad hoc one-off records of any bird. So this covers all birds. So this shows effort, how much effort has been put into atlasing, and you can see the coast is pretty well covered. There's still gaps. Some of the areas are harder to reach, but there's some quite good coverage that's happened. Obviously some spots more than others. The area around Mombasa, this is where I am here on the north coast, Watamu, Malindi, and up here we have some birders based inland in an area called Dakacha. So this is the result of the crow. This is the species map for the house crow, and you can see that they do extend inland quite far. This is the furthest inland they go, a place called Makindu, which is, there's a handful of crows there, and we're trying to get rid of them from there so that they don't spread further inland to Nairobi. But the focus is very much on the coast. And they really like the urban centers. And that's very clear from this map. And if you look at this now compares the effort on the left to the crow distribution on the right. And you can see quite a nice pattern. And this is where we're at in terms of doing this. And Les has been developing some algorithms and so on to look at this in more detail. And I need to get hold of those and use them better. But even just a cursory view can show that. So if you look at the effort here on the left, you'll see the blue circles, one around Mombasa, one around Watamu, Malindi. You can see that, as I mentioned earlier, there's a high effort there. They're quite red squares. There's a lot of cards that have been submitted for those. And if you look at the results here on the right, you can see that indeed there's a high concentration, a high reporting rate. So the red means there's, for most cards, if not all cards that are submitted, the house crow will be recorded on them. As you go down to pink, then there's only 1 in maybe 4, 5, even 10 cards that have got a house crow on them. So there'll be many cards submitted which would not have house crows. That means that, of course, they are less common and less numerous in those areas. So the high areas of high effort show high numbers of crows, which is what you'd expect if the crows are indeed there. What is interesting is the green circle here. This is the area I mentioned earlier, which is slightly inland, Dakacha woodlands. We've got some serious birding going on in there and atlasing. And you can see they're quite red there. There's a lot of effort, a lot of cards being submitted. And yet if you look here, this is the equivalent site, actually the number of crows is relatively low. In fact, it's really quite low. And that, combining those together can tell you that actually this really is probably a true reflection of the concentration of crows. And indeed, as you look at the pattern, really the crows seem to be concentrated along the coastal strip, with only high concentrations inland, like this one, which is the red circle here and the red square on this side. That's a town, that's Kaloleni, and there's known to be a large crow roost in that place. So if you're birding around there, you're going to find crows. So it's around the urban sites. Again, to the north, up here on the left, this one is Garsen on the Tana River, and it's up at the top of the map on the right, the red square, again showing that. So you can tell where the hotspots are for the crows, which is very, very useful. This is some of Les's work that he was doing, helping me with some of this. And again, you can see the pattern on the left, this is coverage. And on the right, you can see the crow distribution, the reporting rates. And this area here, you can see again the same picture of the dark blue large circles showing high coverage, but the small red circles showing low reporting rates. The large red circles and these other ones, we need to work on that to get them to be balanced with the actual coverage which is there, and produce some results which are more useful to look at directly in that way. But that gives you the idea of what can be done with bird atlas data. And this is a fantastic tool for us as we plan and strategize for how to address the whole issue of controlling these crows. We can know that we need to focus on particular areas, particularly on the coastal strip, and not bother about putting lots of effort into poisoning areas inland, as we know the birds will probably move from there to the urban ones. Once control starts, we will be able to actually then see what is happening to the crows. Clearly, we will need data. Birders will need to continually submit data so that we can track it, and that's going to be one of our challenges, is encouraging birders to get out there. The likes of Mustafa, who's watching now, I know will be encouraging you to get out there, and others along the coast, to be atlasing again and again and again the same squares to get the data to see how the numbers change over time. For the population, you'll get a reduction in the reporting rate, so there will be fewer cards which have the crow reported on them. So instead of having them 100% of it, because now every single card will have a house crow on it if you're birding in Mombasa or Watamu or in any of the urban centers. But hopefully, as the crows reduce in number, then one day we'll do a full 5 days of birding and not see a single crow. Now that's what we're aiming at. But in the meantime, another indication will be that the ranking of the species on the full protocol card will change. So currently, almost invariably within the top 10, if not top 3 birds that you record when you wake up in the morning, it's going to be a house crow. But as the control starts, then the ranking of the house crow will drop, and you might have to look harder for it, and it might not come in till species number 20 or even 30 or 40 on your list, indicating that actually it has become much less numerous than previously. Distribution-wise, again, the fewer pentads where it be reported, that would show a shrinking of the range. And that map, which I showed you of the crow distribution, will reduce, and it'll probably be limited to just along the coastline, and we hope in time to have it limited to just 1 or 2 spots, and ideally get rid of them, but I think that's almost impossible to do, to get rid of alien invasives, especially in an open-ended ecosystem like we have here. Birds come up from Tanzania and come down from Somalia relatively easily. So that's going to be what we'll be looking for with the map. And there's a picture of a trap with crows inside it, which will happen alongside the poisoning, but the poisoning is definitely the most effective. So here's, I haven't actually got a chart of the house crows yet, so we haven't had a reduction in them. This shows the reporting rate for mangrove kingfishers. It just shows you what the phenology graphs look like that come out of the atlas. This just shows the reporting rate up the left and the month across the bottom. And for house crows currently, it would be a very high reporting rate right across, basically a flat line across the whole year. Crows are there at a high numbers throughout. What we see here is this is the mangrove kingfisher. It's a migrant from, we believe, further south. We're putting data loggers on some of them to try and track where they come from, hopefully. But here you'll see in the early months of the year, they're not present, and then they arrive and they build up in numbers here fairly steadily through the middle of the year, May, June, July, August, and then in September they start to move off and disappear again. So that means basically the numbers of birds are increasing or the numbers of birds are decreasing. So if you apply this to what we predict with the house crows, currently we've got a flat graph with the house crows, and what we predict to happen is this drop off like you see, whereas the mangrove kingfishers migrate and leave. The same would be true as the crows are killed and poisoned and reduced in number, then you'd see a drop off in the reporting rate. So that's our vision, that's our hope, and I believe that Bird Atlas has got a huge amount of to offer us through this, for this whole process. And thankfully Kenya Wildlife Service nationally have seen this and have asked us to take a lead on this, and we're hoping to get some funding so we can really encourage birders, pay petrol for them and maybe a soda and a piece of bread to get out there and atlas like crazy up and down the whole coast over the next sort of 3-4 years as the poisoning happens. So yeah, obviously this can only happen if we've got sufficient data, and which is why I'm saying we would need to get birders out there, and everybody's records are critical for this. And I see there's Osman is on this as well from Somalia, and certainly there's a population in Somalia which would need to be dealt with as well. And the atlas is really going to help us identify those and track their movements in this way. So thank you. There's big numbers of crows here at sunset moving into a roost. So yeah, thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Colin. That was quite fascinating. It's, you know, people often ask about, like, why should people go back to the same place they've already atlased before? Like, they've already recorded the birds, why should they go back?
Yeah. You've frozen for me.
Or why is it so it's that you've shown some of the ways that correct way, that there's actually very useful outputs that you can have. So thank you so much. We can do a short Q&A session for about 10 minutes. So if anyone has any questions,
it's frozen now.
Questions, feel free to ask for about 10 minutes. saw a question earlier for Laban, so maybe he can actually answer it now. There was somebody asking about whether dragon.
Yeah, I think I will go through the questions because I think, Sydney, your internet connection, I think it's giving some problems.
Flies are only active near water, or is it that after they can be found in dry areas? So maybe Laban, you can answer that question. That was, I think, from David Clarence.
Okay. I think I will go through the question again.
Sorry,
so Sydney,
I was muted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was muted. I actually tried to go through the questions in the chat, and I've given answers to almost each and every question. But I can still add here that all dragonflies need water. We don't have any species that is a dry land, species. Feeding can happen very far away from where the water is. So, but when they want to lay the eggs, they will have to find the water. So they need water, whatever the case. But feeding can happen even kilometers away from any, water source. So the fact that David saw them in the Kacha very far away from the water, it doesn't mean they don't need water. They do. So any other question? There was a question about the migratory species in Africa. And I know of one, which is, I would say, is global. It's not just here, in Africa. And this is the globetrotter, Pantara flavescens. This is a dragonfly that can come from India or from so many other places into Africa. So that's a migratory species, but it's not purely African. It moves all across the continent. Yeah, I can't think of any that is, like from within Africa that is migratory. So that's what comes into mind, Pantala flavescens. Actually, it's called the globetrotter or the wandering glider.
And how far do they go? Because I've seen sometimes like big groups of those globetrotters just flying,
yes.
Sometimes
normally,
in thousands of thousands. How far do they go? Do they go all the way down to South Africa, or what's the pattern?
Yeah, definitely it's a species you find even in South Africa. And like I said, this species is capable to come even from India. So that gives you an idea of how far, their species can go. And just going back to the observation that you make of them feeding, being in large groups, yeah, they probably aren't even migrating when you see them in large numbers, but that's a feeding behavior, which you normally see in forest clearings, and you see them in their thousands. So at that time, I wouldn't say they're even migrating. Yeah, that's a feeding behavior.
We get them down here as well. I actually see them in my garden, but I once came across a massive swarm of them up at Harold Johnson Nature Reserve. There were countless thousands.
I see a question here for Colin. Someone is asking, sorry, somebody is asking, do the Indian house crows interbreed with native crows, or can they interbreed?
No, we've not had any example of that, thankfully, which is good.
Okay. Yeah, and someone else is asking, so when the goal is reached and you'll have to perpetually continue with a low level of control, since there'll always be recruitment from neighboring regions. So I had actually a similar question in my head, and like wondering, do you have like a certain timeline in mind of when the population will reach like a very low number that you would say is satisfactory, and like how intensive the control will have to be over time to keep them low?
Initially it'll be a big hit. We'll have to do a lot of poisoning, but actually it's very, very effective, and you can really reduce numbers quickly from hundreds and not thousands down to just a handful. So I would imagine within about a year to 18 months, we'll have the populations down to, if we are managing to do it right up and down the coastline, we'll get the population of crows down to really quite a manageable number. And after that, yes, we will have to maintain low-level poisoning. So we were doing that here in Watamu in 1999 when we started the crow control there. We didn't have like the 6,000 we have now, but we had several hundred crows resident around here, and probably almost 1,000 in Malindi. And within about 3 months, we had them down to 30 to 50 birds. And in Watamu, not long after that, down to about 5 birds. And we kept it that it would fluctuate up to 20, 30 birds sometimes during the breeding season. But we were just once every month or so, we'd do a week of baiting and then a single day of poisoning at the end. And that would keep them down in number. And that's what I'm expecting we'll still have to do. There's been some people saying they want to eradicate them completely, and I think that's a really extremely difficult thing to do. But obviously we'll try and clear them out from further inland. I see the comment from Neil Baker that they've had them now in Arusha and expanding rapidly out at Dodoma, which is extremely worrying, because I know the Tanzanians had a big push on poisoning them and so on some years back, and I never really heard what had happened to them. And clearly it didn't really work for them, and I'd be interested to know from Neil what the reasons were for their poisoning and their eradication program not to have worked. We will hope, we're trying to get rid of them from the inland places currently, and hopefully we'll succeed in doing that in the next few months.
So maybe one more question. I see someone is asking, they say that they're not increasing at an alarming rate in South Africa. So is there a reason why they're increasing so much in Kenya? Maybe
I think they thrive more in the tropics, in the hotter areas probably. But also, like I mentioned earlier, certainly from my experience at Cape Town, the rubbish collection is much, much more effective. You don't get huge piles of rubbish lying around just on the streets, which we get here. All too often, rubbish bins overflow very, very quickly and are just all over. And that's what really attracts the crows. So if you can control your rubbish collection and sorting and keep your neighborhoods clean, then you'll definitely have a reduction and keep the numbers much lower. And they will not be able to breed and multiply as quickly. But here there's a proliferation of food and the climate's really good for them, which is why they do well.
And there's questions here about non-target species and what you're doing to safeguard, you know, the other birds and the other biodiversity that is not being targeted. So
yeah, that's an important question. What we've found is that we have a very, very focused poisoning. So you pre-bait the crows in one of their feeding areas for about a week before you put the poison down. And it's actually, they do themselves no favors because they are extremely voracious. They really chase off anything else, and they will fight off the pied crows and even dogs and so on that come in to eat the food they want. And so they kind of do the job partly for you. But actually what we do is we stand and watch the bait from, 40, 50 meters away, basically with a catapult and some stones. And if you see a pied crow or a black kite or a dog come nearby, you literally just do the basic thing of throw a stone at it to chase it away. And we've had an extremely successful eradication of crows in the past with very, very low bycatch, as it were. I know Tony Archer, who used to do it in Mombasa in the South Coast, he said he killed 15,000 house crows and only had 2 pied crows that, to his knowledge, that died, and I think 1 dog. So, and I think actually I'd be surprised if a dog died, because actually Stalicide really doesn't affect mammals in the same way. Also, it's been shown that it doesn't affect birds of prey either in the same way at all. So there's great advantages in using that poison. And if you do it properly and carefully and keep an eye on what you're doing, then the likelihood of killing anything else is thankfully very, very small.
Great. That's a really nice answer, and I'm sure many people are reassured by that. The fact that that poison is not detrimental to other biodiversity. So I think with that, we'll close this for today.